Good morning, guys. Today we are going to continue to deal with polynomials. Today we're going to focus on factoring. But before we get into factoring, there's some background work that we need to do. When we factor, we're going to use a method that requires us to use factors and sums. All right, so we need to know the difference. Factors are going to be the numbers that are multiplied together to get a value, and then sums are going to be numbers that are added together to get a value. So for instance, if we take the factors of 18, we can multiply 1 times 18, 2 times 9, or 3 times 6. So these are the ways that we can multiply to get 18. If we wanted the sum of 18, these are just a few examples: 10 plus 8, 12 plus 6, and that should be 9 plus 9. But what you'll notice is that for factors, there are only a few factors that you can use for a number, but for the sum, there are infinite possibilities. There are lots and lots and lots of ways that I can add numbers to get 18, but there are only a few ways that I can multiply to get 18. So when we are doing this, we want to start with our factors and then find our sums, right? So we're going to do a couple little examples so you can see how factors and sums work together. So it says we want to find factors of 12 that sum 7. So we're looking for factors of 12, so that means I'm going to start with 12, and I want to list all of the ways that I can multiply to get 12. Now, I listed a factors chart for you guys a while back when we were doing radicals. I'll list that chart again for you in Schoology in case you need it. But the ways that we can multiply to get 12: 1 times 12, 2 times 6, and 3 times 4. So I'm going to put an F here for these are the factors of 12. And then what I want to do is I need the sum to be 7. So if I take the sum of these, 1 plus 12 is 13, 2 plus 6 is 8, and 3 plus 4 is 7. So the pair that I would be looking for here would be 3 and 4. These are two numbers that when I multiply them, I get 12, and when I add them, I get 7. So it has factors of 12, but a sum of 7. What I want you to do here is go ahead, pause the video. See if you can figure out the factors of 30 that sum to negative 13. Be careful with the negative. Okay? Hopefully you pause the video. First thing that we're going to do is we're going to start with the factors of 30. So my factors of 30 will be 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 3 times 10, and 6 times 5, okay? So I see here these are the factors. We need a sum of 13. So if I'm just looking at these numbers, it looks like the only combinations that might somehow, if I put them together, give me 13 are 2 and 15 and 3 and 10. But we gotta look at what's happening here. If we look at our factors, we have a positive factor, but a negative sum. Now the factors means that we multiply. So the only way to get a positive number when we multiply is if we multiply a positive times a positive or a negative times a negative. So it looks like because my sum is negative 13, instead of positive numbers, I'm going to need negative numbers. So that means I'm going to need my factors to be negative, because a negative times a negative will give me a positive, but when I add them, it will say negative. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make these negative and see which ones sum to negative 13. All right, so if I put negatives here, and then I sum these, the sum here is going to be negative 17, and here it's going to be negative 13. So this is the pair that I would be looking for. So my factors and sums, or the numbers that will work, are -3 and -10. When I multiply these two numbers together, they're going to give me a +30, but when I add them together, they're going to give me -13. So this would be the combination that I will be looking for, -3 and -10, okay? Again, I'm going to try one more. I want you to pause the video, see if you can find factors of -24 that sum to 5. Okay, hopefully you were able to pause the video. Again, if you need to use that factors chart that I gave you guys a while back, again, I'll post it again on the Schoology page. So we want factors of -24, and then we want the sum to equal 5. So I'm going to just start with the factors of 24, which are 1 times 24, 2 times 12, 3 times 8, and 4 times 6. So I need to somehow get a 5, but I have a -24. So having a -24 means that one of my factors has to be negative, because a negative times a positive is the only way that I can get a negative. So one of these numbers has to be a negative. So just using a little bit of context clues, if I'm somehow trying to get a 5, it looks like the only pair of numbers that might somehow give me a 5 are 3 and 8. So depending on what I want, which is a +5, I have to decide, do I want -3 and +8, or do I want +3 and -8? So I'm using these factors, but I have to decide where to put the negative. If I add -3 plus 8, I'm going to get 5. If I add 3 and -8, I get -5. And what I'm looking for is a +5. So this tells me that the combination that's going to work is -3 and +8. So the two numbers that are going to factor to give me -24, but sum to give me 5, -3 and +8. When I multiply them, I get -24, but when I add them, I get 5. So what we're going to do in order to factor is we're going to have to find factors and sums that fit our polynomial. So here's what that's going to look like. Again, I'll post this page in Schoology as well. We're first going to use the box method. So this box should look familiar because we used the box method when we were multiplying. So you kind of want to think of factoring as doing the opposite of multiplying. I'm going to have a trinomial, and I want to know what two things were put together to make that trinomial. So you're going to draw your box, and this is how you set up your box. You're going to put the very first term in the first square, and then the last term in the last square. The other two are blank. We're going to use that factors and sums that we just talked about in the previous slides to find our two factors. And then once we find our two factors, we'll be able to set up our binomials. I know that probably sounds like a lot, but once you see it in action, it'll make a lot more sense. So again, we're going to set up the box, find our factors, put our factors in the box, and then write our two binomials. So here's what that looks like. So I have my box already drawn. In the first square, I'm going to put the first term, which is x squared, and then here I put the last term. Now what is missing is the middle term. So that's what we're trying to figure out, is we need something that's going to give us 9. So when we are doing our x, the 20 is going to represent our factor, and the 9 is going to be our sum. So what's going to happen is our boxes, we're looking for these two middle terms. They're going to have to add up to that 9x. So what we do is we are going to do the factors and sums like we did before. So I want the factors of 20 that add up to 9. So the factor has to equal 20 and the sum has to equal 9. Okay? So we start with our factors of 20. Again, if we need to use our chart, we have 1 times 20 2 times 10, and 4 times 5. Now this is positive and this is positive, so we don't need to worry about any signs here. And I want to know what are the sums. So the sums of this is 21, 2 and 10 will give us 12, and then 4 and 5 will give us 9. We needed 9, so this is going to be the pair that we use. So the numbers that we're going to use are 4 and 5. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to our box and we're going to put those factors in the box. So the factors that work are 4 and 5. But our middle term needs an x, so we're going to put 4x and 5x, and that's going to give us our middle term. So what we're going to do now is to get our two binomials, we're going to take out the GCF. You recall that the GCF is going to be what do these things have in common. So if I look at this first row, these things both have an x. So I'm able to take out an x. And you kind of want to think about multiplication as well, what we did when we were multiplying. And so you should remember that if we want to get an x squared, I have to have an x on both top and bottom. So x times x is how I get x squared. Okay? Here, I have 5x, so that means I multiplied two things to get 5x. So if I already have an x, then that means here I need a 5. So we're going to put 5 on the outside. And then the last square, in order to get 20, it is multiplication. So 5 times 4 is how we get 20. And so the 5 was positive and the 4 was positive. And so what we'll notice is on the outside of the box, we have two binomials. So our top binomial is x plus 4. And then our binomial on the side here is x plus 5. So what this tells me is that when I factor this binomial up top, these are the two factors, right? That means that if I multiply these two things out, they will give me this original thing. So these two things are the same. This is just broken down into its factors, right? And so you're hearing me use that word a lot, but we need to understand that each one of these things is considered a factor. Right? So x plus 4 is a factor and x plus 5 is a factor. All right? I'm going to try another example. All right, so we have our trinomial. Again, we want to start by setting up our box. For our box, we're going to put the first term in the first box, the last term here. We have a positive 35, and then we want the middle to equal negative 12x. So we need to figure out what are our factors of 35 that add up to negative 12. So remember, this is our factor, and this is our sum. So we're going to start with 35. So we have 1 times 35, and then we have 5 times 7, right? Those are the only factors of 35. We need them to sum negative 12, right? And so we talked about we have to play around with our signs. If we have a positive factor but a negative sum, that means that we have to make both of these numbers negative, because a negative times a negative is still going to give us a positive 35. When I sum these, I'll get negative 36, and then here I'll get negative 12. We need a negative 12 in the middle, so that means the factors that I want to use are negative 5 and negative 7. So those are going to be what I place inside of the box. So I'm going to put a negative 5, and remember we put an x there, and negative 7x. We know that this first box is x squared, so that means I have to have an x and an x. And then we just kind of want to intuitively figure out the rest of it. So here, if I have a negative 7x, that means x times negative 7. And then here in this last box, in order to get 35, we have to have negative 7 times negative 5. Once we have the outside, that means that we have our two factors. So this tells me that if I want to factor this, I can break this down into the factors x minus 5 and x minus 7. And so these would be our two factors. And this would be the answer that we are looking for. So we're going to end up with two binomials. So the two binomials that we end up with here, that is our answer. All right, one more. I'm gonna have you guys try it out. So pause the video on your own. See if you can figure out the two binomials that go with this trinomial. All right, so hopefully you pause the video. You set up your box by placing x squared here. Sorry about that. All right, so I'm gonna put our first term here, x squared, and then down at the bottom, negative 40. And we need this center to equal negative 6x. And if you listed your factors and your sums, then you should find that the factors that are going to work are going to be a negative 10x and a positive 4x. Right, so negative 10 times 4 will give us negative 40. And then if we add them, we get negative 6, okay? And so then now we want to write out our factors. So again, to get this x squared, we need an x and an x. And then to get 4x, we need x times 4. And then to get negative 40, it is going to be 4 times negative 10. And so then our factors are going to be x minus 10 and x positive 4. So we connect them with a plus 4. And those are our two factors. Okay? Now these were pretty simple for today because we didn't have a coefficient in front of the x squared. So that's where we're going to stop for today. And then on tomorrow, or the next lesson, we're going to factor, but we're going to put a coefficient in front of the x squared and then see how that changes the process. But for today, we're just going to practice our factors and sums, trying to find the combination of numbers that work. All right, so now you should head to the Schoology folder and find the assignment for today. There will be a graded assignment for today.